Welcome to Financial Wellness and First Professions. This is our second annual webinar of the Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff annual webinar series. This webinar series is co-hosted by several universities in the state of Illinois, but we promote it nationwide. So I know we have people from across the United States that are joining us today. Our co-hosts include the University of Illinois Extension, University of Illinois Student Money Management Center, North Park University of Chicago, who are the primary hosts today, Southern Illinois University's Saluki Sense program, and Columbia College of Chicago. So my name is Andrea Pellegrini, and I run the Student Money Management Center for the University of Illinois system. And I am basically the backup today, and I'm going to hand it over to my friends in North Park University to talk a little bit about what they do and how they're going to be helping us learn about financial wellness and first professions today. So, Evelyn, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Evelyn. I am the Career Programs Manager at North Park and work primarily with first-year students as they're figuring out majors and how that translates into career aspirations and start to get them ready for that. And then I also oversee financial literacy initiatives for our students here.
Thank you, Evelyn. Pamela, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do?
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. My name is Pamela Bozeman. I'm the Senior Director for the Career Development and Internships Office with North Park University, and I serve in my portfolio graduating seniors, graduate students, and alumni, and I also supervise my phenomenal colleagues, including Evie Peterson.
Excellent. Thank you, Evie and Pamela. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our first interactive activity of the webinar. We want to really have you guys familiarize yourself with that chat feature that I kept talking about before the official start of the webinar. So I want you to put in what state and or county you are currently logging in from today. So I am in Champaign County, Illinois. If you can put in where you're logging in from, that will help us understand kind of where everyone is across the United States. We got Chicago, Champaign, Chicago, lots of Cook County, Sangamon County, yeah, Miami, excellent. So I'm going to hand it back over to Pam as you guys are answering in the chat to talk about our learning objectives.
Fantastic, thank you. So we have several learning objectives today, and we hope that this meets your expectations as well. If there are other reasons why you've joined the call, feel free to put that in on the chat, and we'll see if we can't cover those things for you. The first learning objective is to identify expenses associated with a first job, something that we all probably didn't think about when we were applying for our first jobs, but based on our experience, something that we believe we can share successfully. The second learning objective is about debt and understanding personal debt and best practices. The third learning objective is around benefits and determining the personal value of income versus benefits, which are perks that can actually boost your salary. Fourth, we want to talk about negotiation and how to negotiate based on your role, compensation norms, and where you expect to land in that organization. And finally, we'd like for you to prepare a personalized checklist of concepts to consider and questions to ask in preparation for your new job. So I'd love to know, and again, your second exercise of the afternoon, tell me where you are in the job search process, whether you've not started your search yet or applying, interviewing, receiving offers, or have a job. Go ahead and light up that chat box and let me know where you are in your search process. And people are telling me they haven't started yet, just got a new job, congratulations. Got a job for next month, haven't started yet. So quite a bit of variation, and I'm excited that you all are here. I think there are points of this presentation that will be helpful to everyone, including those who have a summer internship or are currently in the application process. So let's move towards a reflective slide. One of the things I'd like to hear from in the chat is, what is your current financial condition? And how does that financial condition impact your job search? And we ask that question because we know that the decisions that you're making about your search are relevant to where you are today in your finances. And this has to be a two-way understanding, that if you are a very new graduate and this is your first job opportunity and you've been eating noodles for lunch for the last several days, that you're going to be maybe more open to the first salary suggestion versus those who maybe have a more stable or confident financial position. All of these things will influence your job. They will also influence how well you're going to do your job, as well as determine what your budget is going to look like and your style of living. So let me know, again, as a reflection, what your financial condition is and how do you think that might impact your decisions moving forward. Next slide, please. What are your financial concerns when it comes to your first job after college? And this is a really big deal because a lot of us have major decisions to make in our lives, and choosing a job is often based on where we are financially and where our families are and how much support we can receive. So I'll go to the next slide. I just want to share a little bit of data with you about some of the financial problems that are facing other families throughout the US. For families that have a significant other or children, healthcare cost is one of the leading issues when we think about how much money we need to earn. For those of you who are still in college or very new graduates and you're not supporting a family, like a lot of you, too much debt is a major concern, or not enough money to pay the debts off that you have. Also, if you're currently working, low wages may be a real issue and an important financial decision, as well as your college expenses post-graduation. So these reflect the top 10, but the top ones are where we'll kind of focus a lot of our energy today. I'm going to hand it over to Evie and have her begin to talk about how we identify expenses associated with our first job.
Thanks, Pam. So we're going to start with that first objective about preparing and thinking about identifying expenses associated with the first job. So I'm going to have you engage in the chat box as well and just answer, in what ways would one prepare for their first profession post-college? So what do you think are important things to keep in mind as you're preparing for what's next? So doing internships, definitely. Anything else that people should prepare for? Internships is a popular one. Perfect. I will have you guys, you can keep chatting in there if you would like to. Transportation, practicum, awesome. So we're going to address some of these and hopefully help you better understand how to prepare. So what we've done is we've come up with some myth mindsets that we see are rather common, and then some mindful mindsets as well. So to start, one myth mindset that we see is the money is coming in, so I can start spending now. And a lot of times this is common for someone to start thinking before they've actually received a paycheck. So whether you just confirmed or accepted a job and you have an idea of what that income will be, you start to think about, oh man, I got the money, let's go. We really see this common among a lot of students that are pursuing medical school and wrapping up that aspect, and they start to get trapped by a spending creep, as we like to call it. So luxury expenses instead of their needs, and just focusing on that until they officially get the actual paycheck. So instead of having a myth mindset, we recommend a mindful mindset of, I have budgeted my expenses and will not spend income I have not yet earned. So this is tied into a spending plan. And we actually did a webinar last month in October about budgeting, and it's called Spooked by Spending Plans, and there's a link actually in the chat box. So if you're interested in learning more about budgeting and spending plans, we highly recommend accessing that webinar from last month. So one of the things to keep in mind is professional appearance. There are some jobs that actually have pretty strict dress codes and other ones that might not enforce any form of dress code. So what we recommend doing as you're preparing for a job is take a clothes inventory. What do you have? What do you really need? and what changes do you have to make within your wardrobe. There are lots of ways that you can get hopefully affordable clothes, whether it's a Goodwill that's nearby or participating in a clothing exchange, but budget out how much you feel like you have to spend on updating your clothes to meet a dress code for professional reasons. There are also other expenses. Sometimes it might be shoes or haircuts, but keep that in mind, as your professional appearance is actually very important as you're transitioning into the professional world. Another thing to consider is Commute. If you're actually following along with the checklist, if you have that PDF close by, another thing to consider that isn't included in this slide is relocation expenses. So if you've been in Chicago for college and you're moving to Colorado, what will the relocation expenses be in terms of, do you need a moving van, and how much will gas cost if you have a car and you're driving that across country? But keep that in mind. Also, if you know anything about the location, how far of a commute might you have? Are there trains or buses that you could access? Do you own a car already, or are you hoping to purchase a car? Figure out your mode of transportation, and then figure out what is the estimated financial expense and the estimated time expense. There are some people that don't mind an hour-long train ride because they can read or listen to podcasts, but other people prefer the flexibility of a car, so keep those in mind as well. The one thing we do say with cars is be aware of the additional expenses, whether it's tabs and license plates, or oil changes and maintenance on your car. Know what those additional pieces are as well. One resource with commuting that they put in is the Car-Free Millionaire. I would definitely encourage you to access that. There's an awesome chart in there that looks at the car expenses versus other forms of expenses, bike repairs or train costs, bus rides, those kind of things. So check it out. Another thing to consider is Workday Meals. Are you someone that's going to have to be up very early and therefore figuring out your breakfast plan on the go, stopping to buy a coffee and pastry? Or are you going to think ahead of time and plan your meal and grab it out of the fridge and take it with you? It's also important to think about lunch plans. Are you someone that will pack a lunch every day? Are you someone that will mix it up? So maybe twice a week you get to eat out with coworkers, or does your employer provide meals? All of these are different expenses with varying amounts, but you'll want to estimate what that would look like for you and calculate those snacks out. As you'll see, there's a few more additional links in the chat box that help you understand those little costs and how they can add up. So whether it's a cup of coffee every day and what that would be like in Colorado versus Chicago, but also food expenses by age and gender. So the USDA has a report where you can actually look and get an estimate of what that might look like for you. So these are important resources that can hopefully help you better understand the money that you would be spending on meals. Okay, the second objective that we're going to talk about today is about debt and understanding personal debt and how to address it. So to start, we'll get you in the chat box hopefully again. These are just basic yes or no questions. Can your credit influence your employment? What do you think? Yes or no? Yes, yep. Great. Yes, this is definitely true. There are some states that can actually request your credit information, so that is something that's important to consider. And then the second question, could debt play a role in your career path? What do you think? Yes or no? Definitely. Yes, yes, yes. Awesome. You guys are awesome. Love the involvement. Yeah, debt can definitely play a role in terms of what jobs you could accept potentially, or we'll talk about a few of those pieces that debt plays out in the next couple of slides. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide. So we're just briefly going to talk about credit reports. If you do not know how to request a credit report, have never heard about this, write down annualcreditreport.com. This is actually your one-spot stop to be able to request a credit report from those 3 different bureaus that are listed below: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. You do not actually contact those bureaus individually or directly. You go through the annual credit website. Credit Karma, someone's asking about that. That is an option. Typically, as far as I know, there are fees associated with that as well. So that's why we direct people to annualcreditreport.com. You can actually decide when you want to do that. So maybe you set a calendar alert, and once a year, that's when you go in and request a credit report from each of those bureaus. Or if you want to, because you get one free every year, you can actually go to each of those, and maybe every 3 or 4 months you request one from Equifax, then 3 or 4 months later Experian, and then TransUnion. You can choose if you want it all at one time or spaced out during the year. Okay, next slide. A little bit more information. What is in a credit report? So if you've never seen one of these, there's 3 different broad topics within that. So first of all, personal identification information. That includes your name, your address, date of birth, social security number, and employment. These are used to identify you. Your race, your color, religion, sex, marital status are not included in a credit report. The collection agency account information would be in there, and then also the public record information. This would include bankruptcies, foreclosures, suits against you, wage attachments, those kind of pieces. And just so you know, bankruptcies actually stay on your credit report for 10 years. It looks like there's been some good conversation going on in the chat box, so hopefully questions are being answered in there. If you are looking for more in-depth information about credit reports, make sure that you check out that Get Savvy Credit Secrets webinar, and that will give you even more in-depth information than what we're going to cover today. Okay, next slide. Here is another myth mindset that we're going to talk about. A grace period means I don't have to think about this yet. When it comes to student loans, it can be really tempting to think, oh, well, I just graduated. I have 6 months until I have to think about that. I'll just let it sit on the back burner for now. But we would rather you use a mindful mindset, which would be, next slide, please. Be proactive and plan in advance how you will address your debt. So what does that mean? There's a lot of different ways that you can be proactive and plan, but when it comes to student loans, you can go to the next slide. These are some of the questions that we recommend you considering in regards to that. So first of all, figure out how much you owe. So a great resource is NSLDS. It should be popping up in that chat box as well. And that will actually give you the amount of loans that you currently owe as a student. You also want to understand what types of loans you have and who your loan servicers are. I know that here at North Park, a lot of our students, theirs are through Great Lakes, and you can actually create your account with them as soon as you start at North Park to take advantage of the tools that they have and keep in touch with them about being mindful with those loans as well. You'll also want to know when your first monthly payment is due. Typically, it will be 6 months after you graduate or are no longer a student. So keep that in mind and then start to think about, okay, do I have money for that first payment yet? Or how much do I need to be saving in preparation for that first payment? Or where am I going to be getting that money for the first payment? We don't want you to get too overwhelmed. So as long as you can figure out, okay, this is how much I need to save per month in preparation for the first one, then you can start to think about, okay, how will my student loan payment influence my budget in the future? How do I make sure that I'm setting aside that money for each month's payment? There is also a webinar for student loans, the Love Your Loan student loan repayment, so keep that in mind as well. Okay. Reducing your debt. So we talked about this a little bit already, but do not start spending before you're paid. This is how people can get spending creep, affected by spending creep, and therefore increase their debt when they don't really intend to. So you don't want to create that additional debt until you have that steady income and know what that is and are earning that money, and that's actually in your possession. Next slide. There are also other types of debt. So obviously for a lot of students, the student loans is the biggest piece. Some students or adults have credit card debt, and so that's important to be aware of. Potentially in the future, you're buying a house, so you might have a mortgage associated with that, or you might owe friends and family some money, whatever it might be. These are some of those categories where you might have additional debt. So be aware of that and be proactive. And actually on that checklist is an aspect that talks about addressing debt. And so hopefully that can help you understand that and figure out how to be proactive around that piece. Next slide. Okay, so these are my biggest 3 tips that I think are the most important as you're approaching debt. So first of all, be proactive. On that checklist, you can use that. You can list your financial responsibilities and understand how much you owe, what the interest rate is, when you have to start paying that. Be proactive about it. It'll make you feel more confident if you can just see it and then start acting on it. Also personalize it. What is the best method for you? What's most effective? Some people prefer small successes that occur quickly. Other ones really want to look at the biggest one and just start chipping away at that. Really figure out what's best for you. Also prioritize. Is addressing and minimizing debt a personal priority? You need to make sure that that's something that you really want to focus on and are ready to be really proactive about it. So in the chat box, there is an additional resource that can hopefully help you develop a debt payoff plan in addition to if you use the checklist that we've provided as well. Okay, next slide. So I'm from Minnesota and I love snow. So you may have heard of this, but I love using the avalanche and snowball methods to describe this. There's a lot of information here, so hopefully you can kind of see how it works. But basically with a debt avalanche, you're prioritizing your highest interest rate first. So with these examples, your first priority is the credit card, which is at 12.9% interest. So basically you're just prioritizing it by interest rate from highest to lowest, and you're gonna put additional money towards that credit card debt before you put it towards the student loan or the auto loan. The snowball is if you like to see the small wins first. So you're looking at the lowest balance, what you owe the least amount on, and looking at paying that off as quickly as you can. So in this case, the student loan is $3,000, and you'll be able to pay that off quicker than the auto loan of $21,000. So that's a really brief introduction of what those 2 different ways to approach your debt is. Okay, and now I'm going to hand it off to Pam, and she's going to talk about benefits.
So thank you very much. We've heard a lot about kind of preparing and listing out our priorities, and we've talked a lot about debt. The thing that we want to move on now is to think about benefits and salary, and think about it in terms of a scale of balance and understanding that one totally influences the other. And how you negotiate these terms has to involve both, because there may be more value in the benefits than you've initially given yourself credit for. So let's go to the next slide. So what kinds of benefits might an employer offer? Well, you probably hear a lot about retirement plans and whether that's a 401k or an IRA Roth plan. Some employers will negotiate time off from work as a part of a benefit, or flexible schedules is another common term that we hear about. And that time off of work or away, or your ability to work from home, may be really important to help individuals make decisions. Savings and investments are also benefits that your employer should be talking to you about, as well as wellness programs and other insurance and health life benefits. So let's talk about a myth mindset. When you tell yourself, I'm not worried about what health benefits I get because I never get sick, I almost think that's a bad omen. Everybody who I've ever heard say that got their first cold, right? We prefer for you to think about a mindful mindset. And then the mindful mindset, always plan for 5 years down the road when it comes to benefits. So if you are of an age where you are dating and have a significant other and there's a possibility to get married within the next 5 years, contemplate that and think about your health benefits from that perspective. If you're of childbearing age, or if you're a second job instead of a first job, you may be thinking about what your health looks like in the next 5 to 10 years in your late 20s or early 30s. But always keep in mind that your health and your life is ever evolving, and your benefit plan should reflect that. Next slide, please. Of the benefits, these are some examples. So when you think about retirement plans, again, defined benefits, 401k, time off from work, also includes maternity leave, savings and investments. If there are organizations or corporations that have a college reimbursement fund, stock options in the company, those are also benefits to consider. What I also find is the mental health that you have. And if you have a job where there's a value system around going to a gym or health magazines or other kinds of things that can be available to you, those are all incredibly important. Next slide, please. So let's go back to this concept of 5-year planning considerations. And I mentioned a few of them earlier. If you're planning on marriage or children, or what type of doctors will you visit? Will you need an HMO, a PPO, or how much are your out-of-pocket expenses? That may also determine what type of healthcare benefit you want to choose on the job. The other thing we talk about in your 5-year planning is wealth and when to start putting away money into an investment account. Now, in my very early 20s, I didn't think this was really important. I had a lot of time in my brain to think about investments. But at 51, I always think I should have started earlier and maybe understanding better what other investment opportunities were out there. A potential resource you may want to consider is the go.uillinois Get Savvy Life Transitions, which I think will do a good job of explaining some of these options to you. Next slide, please. Now, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or like me, rocking the 50s, the consideration for retirement is really critical. For example, you want to ask whether the benefit of an employer match is available to you, and if so, in what capacity? And how long do you have to work there to be vested in that retirement plan? Some organizations and companies will have you be vested, which means you have the ability to draw down or begin to input into those resources earlier in your career, while others will be later. What types of savings vehicles do they offer? Do they even have relationships with banks where you have reduced checking and savings account options? Are all things you want to consider. And as they speak to you, they may, again, weigh out the balance of that initial salary offer. Next slide, please. So this idea of the time value of money, what I really want you to do is just pay attention to the bottom line where it says amount available at 65. What this slide really means is that the earlier that you start to make contributions into your investment portfolios or savings options, the more money you have. So at 22 to 30 years old, you'll obviously have more time to invest than if you started between the years of 31 and 65 years old. And the bottom line is that if you start around the same amount of money, you will have over $1 million if you start earlier and less than that at $862,000 if you start later in life. The other irony is that this generation on the phone will probably need about $1.4 to $1.6 million and stay in good health to retire somewhere between the ages of 65 and 67 comfortably. I know that sounds very painful. Again, there are other websites to consider, including choosetosave.org, which also gives you some calculators and understanding about how to do this. So I don't want to leave out this conversation for our international students. Most of our universities serve international students, and there are lots of questions that they have about the workforce and how do they get involved in these kinds of conversations. So the first thing we'll tell you is to be sure that you stay connected to your international office. A lot of what we purport is that students who even are alumni of universities and colleges have the ability to go back to their international office and talk to staff about sponsorship, visa eligibility, and how you implement those visas in the workplace. Your future employer will also want to know what your status is so that they can help you make decisions about both employment and benefit eligibility. Next slide, please. So with this discussion about benefits, then there's the hardcore question: how do I then negotiate both benefits and salary? And I think this is a pretty important deal, because in the negotiation, you have to figure out some things about yourself. And that's what I want to spend the next couple of seconds talking about. Next slide. So in the chat box, just to be sure you're still with me, what might you want to negotiate? And what is most important to you in the negotiation? Benefits, salary, a mix, healthcare insurance. Tell us a little bit about yourself in the chat discussion and tell me what's important to you now and in the next 5 years. I see benefits coming up. Benefits are really important to people. Lots of benefit questions again, salary and healthcare. So again, these are some pretty smart things, right? Insurance and who covers what exactly, right? So let's discuss a myth mindset. The myth mindset is that the larger salary is more important or has greater value than benefits. Let me tell you what our preference is in the other mindful mindset, which is that flexibility in a benefits package may have even greater value than your salary, depending on where you are. So you want to be sure that you understand how to negotiate that. So the next slide, right? Let me give you the 3 tips that work best for me. First of all, research what the market will bear. So how much do people who are in similar jobs make in the industry and market in that geographic range? You can even try to find out the person who had that job before you, what was their salary range? But understand what the market will bear. The second thing is to know your value. As a part of your research, you have to understand, are you someone who brings little experience to the job? So that's probably going to be that entry-level position. Or are you someone who has considerable experience and you can use that to leverage in the negotiation? Now, you cannot have a conflated concept of your own value, because of course we all think that we should be making $1 million, every last one of us. But there's the reality of what that employer can pay you, and the closer you are to the reality of the industry, the better off you are. The second position for negotiation basics, you've got to ask. And most of us, particularly if we're entering our first job, are nervous about asking to negotiate. You at least have one opportunity to make a statement or to ask a question about the range itself. Traditionally, the employer or the hiring manager sitting in front of you has a range that they can deal with, and there may be a little bit of wiggle room. If they give you an adamant no, I wouldn't suggest asking again, but revisit that negotiation after your first or second performance review. If you are high performing and performing very well at the job, then you are probably better leveraged after that experience to request more money. I'm going to send it back over to Abby now to talk about what other things you should keep in mind in preparation for your career.
Awesome. So thanks, Pam. I see some questions are actually popping up, and we were just going to take a second to check in and see both what are other things you should keep in mind in preparation for your career, and also if there are any questions. And I see there are a couple questions about specific resources and hired as a contractor. Pam, do you have any input in addressing those? That was part of your section.
Certainly. Believe it or not, they actually have a section on Feed the Pigs website that talks a little bit about negotiation that I think they do a pretty good job on. And I will also type in another resource in just a minute into the chat box for negotiating that. And there are some company websites that do a pretty good job of talking about the types of benefits that at least Fortune 500 companies are offering. So if you give me just a minute, I will plug that in.
Okay, and if there are other questions, feel free to type them in the box. We'll try to both pay attention to that. And we're going to move on to just a couple things to consider before we wrap up today. So if we can go to the next slide. So there are times where you can have a really tight budget. I graduated just as the recession hit in 2008. And so side gigs and selling stuff were a very big part of my reality. So what we want to do is, you'll see there's a couple of resources that pop up in the chat about different side hustles that you can do, either to pay for college, but also as you're transitioning out. During my time, I did some taste testing and those kind of things, but there are great side gigs such as being a virtual assistant. You might have skills that you can barter with someone. Maybe you're a photographer. There are a lot of different ways that you can at least consider increasing your income if you feel like that's your best option. The other side of that is to think about, okay, are there ways that I can decrease my expenses? Maybe it's a housing change. We all love when we can have our own place all to ourselves, but maybe it's a season of having a roommate or two, just so that your housing expenses are a little bit lower than a one-person apartment. There could be a transportation change. Maybe you can carpool. If there's bus or train access that gets you from point A to point B, give it a shot. But those are some ways that you can decrease expenses. And a lot of times we see that's actually an easier way for people to adjust their budget when it is really tight, is to figure out ways to decrease expenses. And then if they have time and energy, they'll look at increasing their income through a number of different ways. And I saw someone just said, living in friend's basement. It's true. The last thing is, for decreasing expenses, you can consider loan deferral or an income-driven repayment plan, because typically deferral is only an option if there are very specific criteria that you would have to meet. So a couple of things to consider. Next slide. Okay, so if you printed off the checklist or have accessed that PDF that we created, you'll see that a lot of the information that we've covered today is visually represented on that worksheet. This is for you to figure out how and where it would be helpful, whether you're looking at addressing debt or an upcoming job opportunity. And on the back, there's a little kind of budget basics worksheet that can hopefully help you outline some of those pieces. So yeah, like the list says, professional experience, relocation expenses, daily work day expenses, and just a budget basics piece in there as well. So feel free to use that however you want. And I would encourage you, at a webinar like this, we have shared a lot of information with you and a lot of steps that you could do. I do understand that a lot of you are very busy people, and so think of one or two action steps that you can do. Maybe you've never requested a credit report before, and you're saying to yourself, okay, this weekend I'm going to go on to annualcreditreport.com and access or request my first credit report. But I would highly encourage you to come up with one or two action steps that you're going to do either today or in the next week. And then think about, okay, in the next month, what else do I want to do? Set up some action steps, and maybe if you have a friend, they can help you keep accountable in that. That is all for my content. I'm actually going to hand it over to Andrea as she wraps us up today.
Thank you, Evie. So I want to challenge you guys, since we have a little bit of time, to put in the chat any ideas for action items that you've gotten out of today's webinar. Like Evie said, and Pam's been discussing, we have put a lot of information in the chat. There's a lot of things that you could do, but what's one or two things you definitely want to do in the next week to help you with this new transition, new exciting transition into your new profession? You can put that in the chat. Request a credit report. Excellent. Exploring IRAs. There's a lot of options there. We will also send in our follow-up email some links to previous webinars that talk about investments, like using IRAs or other types of investments, the basics of investments, so that you have a better understanding of the terminology that's used and some of the benefits packages that you might receive from an employer. You might want to learn more about what's in a credit report. We have some information on that we can share. And we can make sure that all of the things we've shared in the chat here are nicely organized in the follow-up email that we send out as well. I also would like to invite you to participate in our financial literacy badges program. So we have designed a digital badges program that aligns with the United States Department of Treasury's financial core competencies. So you can earn a badge in one of 5 core competencies laid out by the Department of Treasury. And this particular webinar, if you complete this quiz, goes towards the earning badge. If you complete 3 earning badge eligible financial education activities, then you can get a digital badge to put on your LinkedIn profile or your online portfolio. And the reason why we decided to do this is because more and more employers are looking at financial stability as a measure of productivity in the workplace. For instance, earlier Pam was talking about the role that credit plays. Avvy was discussing this as well. More and more employers are using credit checks as part of background checks to just see how responsible you are with your finances, because we know that financial stress impacts productivity at work. So this is just one other way to show a potential employer that you have financial skills and knowledge to help you be a little less stressed out about finances when it comes to being productive at work. We also have another webinar coming up in February during America Saves Week on how to save money on food. Our colleagues in University of Illinois Extension will be the lead on that. We have a lot of resources that we're putting together to help you save money on food. It's one of the biggest expenses in my budget, or the biggest variable expenses in my budget besides my mortgage. So this is an area where a lot of people can overspend. I know I usually overspend because I love food. So we're going to talk about how to save some money on your food. And we want to stay in contact with you guys. The link to the quiz is not working. We will fix it. Zongchi, can you get that off of WebTools and get the direct link since the quiz isn't working?
Andrea, I'm also wondering, I'm seeing a couple questions, and maybe Pam wants to chime in about benefits and individual needs. I'm wondering if we just want to answer some of these.
Yes, go ahead and do that. I will search for the quiz issue, and you guys address questions in the chat.
So I'm happy to chime in on that. There were a couple of questions about, how to learn about benefits, what's a good kind of introductory conversation. And so I listed an article actually that comes from a site called The Balance. And the most recent article from January 22nd, 2017 that I've used is titled Understanding Your Employee Benefits. And they do actually a very good job of introducing the types of benefit programs that are out there and how you might consider them in your search. I also reference in the group chat a book called No One Will Hire Me. And it's written by authors Ron and Carol Kranich, who are PhDs, and they talk about and present 17 mistakes and wins for the new job. And in chapter 13, it actually talks specifically about the mistakes we make when we are in a salary negotiation. So they talk a lot about premature money talks, asking for too much or under asking, negotiating at the right time, and other resources on salary negotiations. And finally, I think both Andrea and I talk a little bit about the sites that include PayScale and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which will break down salaries by region and industry to give you a comparative analysis of what you're looking at. Excellent follow-up questions. If you still are looking for more resources, go ahead and put that in the chat box and we'll try to shoot some more out to you. I think Andrea just put up a direct link to the quiz. So if you haven't already had an opportunity, go to that corrected link and please complete the quiz. We'd love to know more and get you to feel confident in the material that we've presented today.
And Andrea, just to confirm, I believe that you do not have to be a U of I student for the badging, correct? So
Correct. We give it out to everyone. We had people in Europe participate. So if you just make sure to use your permanent email address so that we can send the badge once it's completed to the correct email address.
So I'm looking at a couple of other questions, Andrea, if you will allow me to answer in the general.
Yeah.
There seems, again, to be lots of questions about paying off credit card debt and kind of managing debt. And it's really a very customized thing. So that's a little bit of the reason why we're being a little bit vague, because everyone's credit situation is very, very different. But I could share a couple of tips that I share with my students at North Park that seem to be very helpful, and maybe you will find some solace in that. The first thing is to tackle your smaller credit card balances first and get them out of the way. So if you have a credit card with $300 or $400 on it, try to kind of get that out of the way and save those cards and keep those cards open so that if you have small expenses that you can pay off every 30 days or less, that's one smart way to do that. I always, again, caution people to think about transferring credit card debt to another card. You have to be sure that your credit rating is solid and that there are no special fees or problems or even a higher interest rate. So as much as you can, just consider and make sure you're researching the credit card options and that it's a successful transfer for you. And finally, I tell a lot of students that having credit cards is great, but letting them lapse over 30 to 45 days creates a huge interest dilemma and a spiraling effect. So wherever possible, avoiding using those credit cards wherever you can and pursuing only those credit cards with the lowest interest rates possible are very helpful.
I'd also like to add is sometimes there's extra fees for transferring debt from one credit card to another credit card. So just be mindful of the details whenever you are looking at consolidating debt, especially credit card debt. And if, for instance, if you want a more specialized kind of overview of your options and you're one of the University of Illinois campuses, my office serves all three of the University of Illinois campuses, and we do individual appointments by request. So you can always email us and let us know what kinds of questions that you have, and we can try to help you come up with like the pros and cons of your different options. We can't give advice, but we can tell you what the benefits and costs are to what your different options are. Were there any other questions that we missed?
Andrea, I saw one question that I jotted down, and I want to be sure that the listener hears from us. And I think it was a question about, again, negotiating one's value. In addition to that, No One Will Hire Me book, which I think it does a really good job and kind of a funny job of explaining some of that. I do want to throw out just a couple more ideas about negotiating and how you're negotiating. One of the things that I like to tell students and alumni is to negotiate from your own personality strength. And what I mean by that is if you happen to be an introvert, as my cousin might say, an innie versus an outie, but if you're someone who's a little shy, then trying to make your discussion or negotiation more robust may not feel as authentic. So I always tell people to be mindful of who you are and your personality type, to ask in a way that you are comfortable, but to have first and foremost the courage to make the ask. I have a very extroverted personality, and so I tend to be able to ask those questions more directly, but I also am someone who can I think, understand the tea leaves. So if I'm getting a little bit of pushback, I know when to stop pushing that question, or if someone appears to express any interest, I know how to kind of push forward on that. But to totally try to negotiate from your own strength and negotiate based on what you know and are confident in. If you find that in the negotiation you're having to push this point more aggressively than you feel comfortable, that's a good indication that you should stop, that negotiation shouldn't go any further. And what you want to do if you want to accept the position is to go ahead and prove yourself over the next 6 to 12 months and come back to that discussion. Finally, when you're thinking about a negotiation, you have to know what the line in the sand is for you. And so if you get to a point where the offer that you're receiving is simply too low and the benefits don't make up that, you have to figure out how much courage you have to turn that position down. And for a lot of us who are entering the workforce for the first time, that can be very uncomfortable. But if you have a salary offer that is much lower than you expected and is much lower than in the market, you can actually accept that position to your detriment. And it might be too difficult to negotiate your second job salary or your third job salary because of how low you started in the first job. So understand what that floor is for you and understand that you may have to walk away from an opportunity that may not be in your best interest.
That's an excellent response, Pam. I think you're the best person to answer that question. We did just get another question about, I'm assuming, prioritizing financial goals, Amy. So a lot of students, especially when you are just graduating, you have a lot of things on your plate. So the first thing you want to do is analyze everything that's going on with your finances. Understand what your debts are, assess where you want your career to go or where you want your personal life to go. What are there other goals that you have going on? For instance, when we have a financial coaching session in our office, the first thing that I'll ask a student is, what do you want to do? Let's not talk about financial goals. What do you want to be in life? What are your big time goals? And what role do financial priorities play in your ultimate goals? For instance, if someone wants to be a homeowner and that is a very high priority to them, we need to assess what resources do they have in place, what financial obligations that they are already committed to, and what options that they have for addressing financial responsibilities while also addressing their savings goals. You might even talk to a financial planner if you have like retirement goals and you have debt payoff goals and you have other financial responsibilities and you want a professional financial plan developed. A financial planner is legally able to provide you specific advice based on your particular situation and what your personal goals are, better than someone that can't legally provide financial advice. For me personally, when I graduated, it was my biggest priority was paying off my debt because it made me anxious. My student loans made me very anxious. I also bought a car because I needed to travel for work. So managing student loan debt and my car note are my biggest financial responsibilities. And therefore, in order to expedite those payoff plans, I did not contribute as much to saving for retirement. I was able to save a little bit so I could take advantage of the time value of money. I took advantage of employer match options, and I contributed to an IRA so that I was still accomplishing the savings goal, but it wasn't as high a priority as my debt repay off. And that was a personal choice. It is very personal. And I think that Pam definitely touched on that earlier. It is such a personal choice. You have to make sure that you're addressing what your own values and priorities are in the context of what resources you have available and what you're willing to compromise on.
So Andrea, there were two other questions that came up, and one plays off of what you just articulated. Someone is asking a question about navigating the interview process, particularly if this future employer is asking you what your previous salary was, particularly if you know that your salary was low in the first place. And so I can answer simply by saying, if someone's asking you about your previous salary, you have an obligation to give them a range. But be careful not to give them the exact dollar amount, right? So if you worked at a position for, say, 12 months to 48 months, you can say that your salary was in the range of 35,000 to 45,000, right? Which may give you an opportunity to boost the offer that's coming down the pike for you. So that's one way to do that. But you're right, you should just be conscientious about giving a lower salary if you think that's going to influence it. You also have to operate with integrity. So you can't make it up, right? You never want to have to tell a half truth, but I think it's advisable to use ranges as a part of your discussion. So that's one answer. And then earlier there was a question that I jotted down about international students and employment, and someone was asking about what visas there are. And I asked my colleague in our international office, Ida Hibben, to send over some information that I will share with you really briefly. The two distinctions that she made are F1 degree-seeking students who can work on campus up to 20 hours per week from start of the program. They can do off-campus internships, paid or unpaid, after 2 semesters of full-time studies. There are also J1 exchange students who can work on campus up to 20 hours per week from the start of the program, but they may not do off-campus work or internships unless they are from one of our partner organizations at North Park. So that is an exception. But those are the two options that she wanted to be sure that we mentioned during the call.
And I believe that's similar for the rest of the University of Illinois campuses as well. If you do have questions about your individual international visa status, if you're an international student, all of the University of Illinois system universities have a international student services office on campus that have very well-trained professionals that are much better able to answer those questions than I am, for sure.
Same here.
Okay. All right. So does everyone that's still on the call feel like you got your questions answered? We want to make sure we get everyone's questions answered that has them. And don't feel obligated to stay on. We'll make sure that this discussion piece is in the recording when we post it. We'll edit out the beginning so you don't have me talking a whole bunch. So. Okay, thanks for everyone for joining us today. We had a great day. This is a great webinar. We'll make the recording available a little bit later this week, probably by Friday. Hopefully we get that all taken care of. Pam and Evelyn, do you have anything else to add?
No, thanks for participating. We loved the interaction and questions. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for the partnership, Andrea, and I hope that everyone on the call has enough resources and that it's useful. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Okay, we're going to close down the webinar now. Have a great week.